To the Board of Adjustment regular meeting on March 7th, 2024 at 4:30. Welcome to the Village of Pinehurst Board of Adjustment. My name is Tom Schroeder, and I am the chairman of the Board of Adjustment. The proceeding is being video recorded, so I would remind everyone that they must ensure that their microphone is on and that you speak into your microphone. Okay. A whole bunch of introductions, but I think everybody was in here for the first round for the Planning and Zoning Board, so I don't see any particular reason to go through all the reductions, and when we get to the presenters, we will introduce them as they come up. Quorum, this board size is 5, which includes a chair, includes the chair itself. We have 5 people seated, yes, but we do need to take an administrative issue in turn. Regular member Paul Roberts is unable to be present, so I could get a motion to seat Bruce. Bruce, how do you pronounce your last name? Anonymous, thank you. Anonymous as an alternate to the Board of Adjustment.
I would like to make a motion to seat Bruce Anonymous today in place of Paul Roberts for me.
Okay. Second?
Second, Bruce Hieronymus.
I know, I said, they made me think I said it wrong. That's all.
Thank you for doing that, Bruce. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, Bruce, you viewed, I believe you told me or in an email that you reviewed the original meeting, one of them 3 times, which is thank you very much for your tenacity in doing that. And do you have any relevant questions as to why we can't move, why you are not ready to move forward in this matter? Okay. Then you are seated as a member of this board, and now we do have 5 board members up here. All right. Is there anybody who has not reviewed the minutes for the last meeting, the February 1st meeting minutes? Have they not reviewed them, and or do we have any inputs or changes to those minutes? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Hold on, he's got,
I move to approve the minutes of the February 1st, 2024 regular meeting.
Matt made the motion.
Second.
Motion's been made and second to accept the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's carried. The minutes are accepted. At this point in time, is there any regular business other than quick review of the agenda? The agenda for tonight is called to order, approve the minutes. We've done those. We will have a public hearing, and I'll announce more details about that shortly. And then there'll be a space for a general meeting, and the next meeting, as previously discussed in the planning board, is on the 4th of April. So that is where we stand. Any modifications required or recommended for the agenda? Hearing nothing, we'll move forward. Okay. Can I get a motion to recess the regular meeting and re-enter the public hearing?
I move to recess the regular meeting and re-enter into the public hearing.
Okay. Jeremy made the motion and was seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing nobody opposed, the motion passed unanimously. Okay. Now that we're in the hearing, this is what the hearing is about and is the title of the hearing. It's PLN 2023-000473, having to do with 8 Carolina Vista variance request. Purpose of the public hearing is to receive testimony for a variance request from the Pinehurst Development Ordinance Section 9.13 fences, walls, and columns, subsection C for the property addressed at 80 Carolina Vista, further identified as Moore County PID number 000258808. This property is located within the H or Hotel zoning district. I'd like to start from my right this time, and I would like you to each state your name for the record and state whether you have visited the subject site of this matter between the last meeting, which is Thursday, February 1st, and this one, and also have you had any ex parte discussion regarding this matter? Starting.
Sonia Rothstein, and I am aware of the site.
Okay. As to ex parte, have you had any ex parte communications? Just make the statement.
Oh.
Okay.
Matt Jones, I had not visited the site since the last meeting, and no ex parte.
Okay, thank you.
Jeremy Hooper, no ex parte communication, and I have not specifically visited the site.
Bruce Hieronymus, I have visited the site on 2 occasions. I've had no ex parte communications.
And were those visits between February 1st and now? Okay. I have not visited the site between February 1st, and I have had no ex parte communications or discussions in this matter with anybody. Okay, get that out of the way. Next, we're going to swear in the applicants. If the applicants would please take a seat in the center. Well, before you take a seat, I'd like you to stand there. Just stand right behind the chair if you would. Sir, are you going to testify? Then you can stand up there with them. Okay, and I'm going to go through, and I need to know your name, what you're here for, what portion of the type of hearing, and I will then, once I go through that, for each of you, I'll swear you in for your testimony. Start with my left.
Bob Coons, Coons Jones Design, here representing the applicant, Pinehurst Resort.
Okay, sir?
Calvin Berkeley, representing Pinehurst Resort.
Okay,
Matt Hardy with Kimley Horn and Associates, and I'm here in support of the resort.
okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, thank you very much. All three of you have been sworn in. And then we need to swear in the staff. And who's going to be presenting today besides Alex and Michael?
Just so we're clear on the record, Michael and myself have both previously been sworn in.
Okay.
The hearing's been continued, so if you just want to affirm, so it's on
All right.
the
then-
record that
then
we
I'll
understand we're still under oath.
Right, okay. And Michael, you understand you're still under oath,
Yes, sir.
okay? And you're the only two that are planning at this point in time to testify.
We need others we can pull from the bench.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're off to the hearing, and staff goes first.
Good evening, everybody. I'll be the one talking to y'all. So, again, it's Michael Mandeville, senior planner here, Village of Pinehurst. This is a variance, a request for a fence variance at 80 Carolina Vista, requested by the Pinehurst Resort. So the purpose of the public hearing is to receive testimony for a variance request from Pinehurst Development Ordinance, Section 9.13, fences, walls, and columns, subsection C, for the property addressed as 80 Carolina Vista, further identified by Moore County PID number 000258808. This property is located within the hotel zoning district. Specifically, the owner, Resorts of Pinehurst, are requesting a variance to increase the fence height from 6 to 8 feet with interspersed brick columns up to 9.9 feet 8 inches along Highway 5. Additionally, this fence would vary from the fence design standards provided in the Pinehurst Development Ordinance by adding a specific trim detail at the top of the fence. Fences are defined in the PDO as structures 18 inches or taller used to delineate a boundary as a barrier or a means of protection, confinement, screening, or as an aesthetic component of landscaping. The evidentiary hearing process. Requests for variance are quasi-judicial decisions which require and evidentiary hearing. These decisions are quasi-judicial due to the fact, judgment, and discretion is used in applying the standards for review. The purpose of evidentiary hearings is to gather competent, relevant, and factual evidence on the application, not solicit broad public opinion. All who participate must be sworn in to provide factual testimony and relevant evidence only in limited repetitious testimony. Staff acts as the initial witness by presenting basic information and background on the request and enters staff exhibits into the record. The applicant and other witnesses will be sworn in and are able to provide factual testimony on the application to the board. Board members listen, ask relevant questions, assess the credibility of all testimony, remain impartial, and vote on the case. At the conclusion of the hearing, the board shall make its decision based on the evidence submitted and testimony given while adopting findings of facts on all standards. Okay. The public hearing was noticed in accordance with the Pinehurst Development Ordinance and NCGS 160D-406. As you can see, there's the area of the resort in the hatched area on the map, and the red are the adjacent property owners who have been notified. As you can see, there is the proposed fence, the current fence is in that location, and this is where the new fence would go along the red line, and that's along Highway 5. There's a picture of the current fence in its state as of now. And there is the fence concept that was presented the first time we met, and it has stayed the same since then. And one second, as you can see, the fence, actual fence part is up to 8 feet, but the columns are proposed to be 9 feet 8 inches. So a little background, the subject property was deeded from Pinehurst, Inc. to the Resorts of Pinehurst on February 15th, 1985. The subject property is approximately 991,425.6 square feet in area, or plus or minus 22.76 acres, which complies with the minimum lot size requirement of 1 acre for the hotel zoning district. Single-family and some multifamily dwellings are located adjacent to the subject property. The lot contains the Pinehurst Resort, along with several supporting structures. And there's an aerial photography map of the project area, and as you can see, that's the resort hotel in the middle. And here is your decibel levels from the existing peak area or peak hour traffic. As you can see, the red area is the middle. That's Highway 5, and that's where your maximum noise is going to be during peak hour traffic. There is this is the existing peak hour traffic with a 6-foot barrier, and this is existing traffic with 8-foot barrier. And we can go back, and so you guys can get a little better look at that during this presentation, if you'd like. I don't think I can.
Go back and forth between the two of them.
And for a point of clarification too, the information that Michael's going over, and I'm sure he'll get to this when he's able to conclude his presentation. This is material and evidence that have been forwarded to the staff on behalf of the applicant and the petitioner here, that then they're going to respectfully request, and so will staff, to be entered into the record. So I believe once we get into that portion, after we complete staff's, we'll have the ability to be able to manipulate the screens a little bit and have them side by side.
And this is a chart which was provided by the applicant that shows decibel levels and what they equate to. And most of the maps that were provided for the decibel levels fall somewhere between, I think it was 45 to 65-ish decibels And that's represented in this chart here. And we can go back and look at that when the time's right. The standards of review, the Board of Adjustment shall not grant a variance unless and until it makes findings that all of the following standards of review have been met. A necessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance. It shall not be necessary to demonstrate that in the absence of a variance, no reasonable use can be made of the property. 2, the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, or topography. Hardships resulting from personal circumstances, as well as hardships resulting from conditions that are common to the neighborhood or the general public, may not be the basis for granting a variance. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. The act of purchasing property with knowledge that circumstances exist that may justify the granting of a variance shall not be regarded as a self-created hardship. The request of variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. Action by the Board of Adjustments. After concluding the public hearing, the Zoning Board of Adjustments may have the authority to subpoena witnesses and may request additional information, continue the public hearing on the request of variance, grant the request of variance, deny the request of variance, grant the request of variance with conditions. In granting any variance, the Board of Adjustments may attach appropriate conditions, provided the conditions are reasonably related to the request. Any decision to grant or deny the request shall be accompanied by findings of facts stating the reasons why the request meets or does not meet each standards of review. Granting of any variance request requires a concurring vote of 4 or 5. Staff does not offer recommendations on variance requests, as decisions are to be based solely on the testimony and evidence presented at the quasi-judicial hearing. At this time, staff would like to submit the following into record: staff reports with attachments and exhibits, presentation, application, and the applicant's materials and exhibits.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions for me?
Does anybody on the board have questions?
Thank you.
Hearing nothing, we'll move forward. Okay. Gentlemen, you're up. So if you
So
would-
first, wanted to start off with thanking Bruce for being able to be here. I know that we had a continuance, 2 continuances, and some of them were due to not having enough people. So thank you for being able to be here. And then also wanted to thank Paul that had encouraged us, I think, to get the sound studies done because we got introduced to Tad, and he has provided us some good information to talk about tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob from there.
As Calvin mentioned, the last time we were here, there were some questions that we needed to answer. There were some very good questions that came up from the board. The questions were related to the location, the materials, if what we were proposing was really going to do what we thought it was going to do. And then, what is the noise level and what is that? So through that process, after that meeting, what we did, the resort hired Tad, who is, he can give you his credentials, but he does noise analysis with Kimley Horn Engineering in Charlotte, to prepare a noise study, which we included in the packet. That study, what we asked him specifically is the location of that fence important? What materials work best to screen and to get the noise levels that are acceptable for the resort and the spaces they're trying to protect? And then also, just what are the decibel levels out there? So I think, as we mentioned, the resort is looking for the modification and the variance particular to the areas. I'll flip forward here. That's the existing fence. But you can see on this slide the areas that are really interested in screening. You have along Highway 5, you have the pool area, you have the event space out here, and then the villas that are along this area. So from a location perspective, we went back and looked at the site because there was a question of whether do we need a variance because of the location? Because a lot of this fence currently is 20 feet outside, which it wouldn't need a variance because of going inside the 20-foot buffer. So that was one of the first things we looked at, and Ted did some analysis on that. We looked at how much of that fence right now is outside of the 20 feet and how much is in. So right about where you see this yellow mark, where the gate is located, you get just past there, and the fence starts to go into the buffer the whole way from there all the way to Ritter Road. Really from that yellow dot to the northwest, for the most part, it's 20 feet outside. So Tad's noise analysis did talk about the distance from the roadway and looked at how that impacts the decibels and the noise levels behind that area. Again, the critical areas to protect are the pool and the event space. That's where large events are held, and that's where I think most of the complaints that the resort receives come from. So looking at that, that was what we've gone back and done a lot of study, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Tad and let him really walk through that study and analysis and give you the feedback related to materials, location, and how that impacts the level of noise that happens behind that location.
Can offer recommendation for when Tad introduces himself, if he would also present his qualifications and his background and whether or not he's providing expert testimony for us.
Yes. So if you would start with that, I believe you heard what was said, please.
One thing I would like to add, so as Tad is going to explain, the thinking prior to was a wooden fence, 8-foot-high wooden fence, and that would be the acceptable, that would help and justify the height change. I think after that analysis, I think it's led to some changes in thought of what material and what that fence should look like. And actually this evening, we've sort of taken out the thought of the design change and looking at some different materials in different ways that different materials, brick or some other composite material of some sort that would actually do more to prevent the noise coming off of Highway 5. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tad.
Good afternoon, evening, members of the board. My name is Tad Hardy. Like I'd stated earlier, I work for Kimley Horn & Associates out of our Charlotte, North Carolina office. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of North Carolina, and I've been doing noise-related studies for about 12 years now, if I do my math correctly, my quick math. So yeah, this is something that is near and dear to my heart and that I've been doing for quite some time. And Bob, if I could snag the mouse for me, it'd be easier, I think. So I'll start here talking about generally what it is that I did to assist with coming to the conclusion of, I guess, needing a higher wall and maybe some adjustments to the location of the wall itself. We used the NCDOT traffic noise policy as somewhat of a basis for the analysis that was completed, just because we are obviously worried and wondering about the traffic noise and nothing else in particular. So with that being said, when I was on site in the middle of January, we took, and actually, is this going to let me show anything? Maybe not. Well, I can speak to it. So one of the things that we do when we take noise measurements on site, oh, there it goes, it shows up, to understand generally what it is that is going on. If you go back to that previous one, it's easier to see. Sorry for the confusion here. But so what we do is we take a set of measurements in a geometric array all the way as close to the fence line, so about where that yellow gate is shown. We took a measurement there and then subsequently moved back in distance to understand how the current traffic noise is falling off as you get further into the property. And those sets of measurements, along with concurrent traffic data that's collected, is used to create an existing conditions model that we calibrate to allow for us to then use for additional analysis to make sure that what we're recommending is not only going to work, but isn't just completely off the wall. And so when we were out there taking the measurements and collecting traffic data, both the vehicle mix and speed, we then were able to go in and create a model of the existing conditions. And so you can see we've got the pool building as well as the existing masonry wall that's adjacent to Highway 5, and then the villas are, modeled as solid structures. The white lines are the roadways emitting noise, and we pulled existing ADT volumes from the NCDOT online traffic system. That's basically a repertoire of all the traffic volumes and truck mixes and stuff throughout the state. And so we use that to then determine what generally is considered a peak hour traffic volume along this section of road and put it into the model, and this is what you can see. The colors may be a bit difficult to see on the screen, but generally what we're trying to achieve is, if you can see the orange to yellow transition that's in the middle of the open space and event area between the pool and the villas, that is the 55 decibel noise contour right there. And when I was discussing with Calvin in order to understand his goals and what we're trying to achieve here, obviously not getting interrupted during special events is important to them. And so what we did is we used threshold for areas of quiet and serenity that are outlined in the NCDOT traffic noise policy to then go through and analyze what the current situation is looking like versus what it would look like if an actual wall or barrier was put in place of the fence. Because I don't know if you could see in the previous slides, but the fence, it's slatted, offset, you can see through it. The noise, truthfully, just spills through with little to no reduction just because it is not solid in nature. So the first thing that we ended up doing, like Bob had mentioned earlier, is we looked at a scenario where we put a 6-foot wall, a more substantial wall on the existing fence alignment. And you can see immediately just the changeover from the fence to an actual barrier of some sort brings that orange to yellow transition for the 55 dB contour a little bit closer to the road, out of the middle of the green space, which is beneficial. But the goal, as I had mentioned, was to get noise levels down to a more quiet baseline to then be able to enjoy the outdoor area during various events. And so we modeled an 8-foot tall wall. And Bruce, this is where I can go back and forth a little bit, but you can see this is the 8-foot barrier on existing alignment, or on the existing fence alignment. And you can see how that orange noise contour gets pulled back almost to be right in line with the fence in and of itself, or the barrier in and of itself. So the goal in this case, by bumping up to the 8-foot height, achieve the goal that we had been aiming for, which was to get more quiet noise levels in and around 55 to 50 on and throughout the outdoor event area. And so then the next scenario that we were tasked to look at was what happens if we shift the barrier to be within the setbacks, closer to the road. And the general rule of thumb that any person that deals with noise on a regular basis will follow is move the barrier closer to the source to help reduce the noise more effectively and efficiently. And so the next scenario here, you can see we have the 6-foot height barrier modeled within the setbacks. I believe that it was a 5-foot offset from the property line, if I recall correctly. And immediately you can see that the 55 dB contour is a little bit closer to the road before we even bump up to the height of 8 feet. But as soon as that height adjustment occurs, then you can see that not only does the 55 decibel contour get within the vegetative buffer that's there today, but the louder noise level contours above 55 are contained closer to Highway 5. And so at the end of the analysis, the combination of two things ended up being the recommendation that we move forward with, which is allowing the wall height to be bumped up to 8 feet and then also being set within the setback that's in place today. I think, pass it over to you now. Yeah, sure. Unless there are questions that we need to talk through.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to talk about materials and have you maybe talk about materials a little bit as well. So we had originally prepared.
Before we go on,
Yes,
just a
sure,
second, does
sure.
anybody have any questions specific to what was just presented? Bruce?
One of the reasons I wanted to see the two slides side by side is I wanted to understand if there was any deleterious effect on the other side of the road by constructing this type of an effective sound barrier. Did it push the decibel levels higher on the other side of Highway 5? And I can't tell with one slide at a time. if
Yeah,
there's-
no, and it's, the answer is no, generally no. The reflections that come into play are very minimal. And so, in a sense, what happens, and it is kind of hard to see just because of the minute changes in those contours across Highway 5. But generally, the traffic noise that is generated on the roadway itself, in a sense, is masking any of the amplified reflections that could potentially occur on the other side. So it's, in a sense, acting as a barrier, like the traffic itself doing that.
With that, what did you say, a 5-foot migration of the new fence from where the existing fence was into the setback? Is that what I heard? It was
It was
approximately 5
modeled
feet?
At a 5-foot offset from the property line, so it's completely within the setback.
Moving the existing vegetation?
Our plan, we have not designed it yet. We would plan to, when the reason we haven't designed it, we wanted to find out if we could get the variance prior to, because otherwise we'll go, just put it back on the 20 feet off, most likely. But we wanted to find out if we could get the variance. That way, we need to work around the vegetation that's there. There are a lot of great trees, magnolias and live oaks and a lot of other things that are in that.
Yeah, because they're beneficial to reducing noise. That's
Absolutely.
my point.
So we want to make sure that we retain as much of the vegetation as possible along that frontage. That's why we haven't designed it.
Okay, thank you.
Couple questions. On the existing peak hour traffic, does that model include the existing fence?
So no, because when we took the measurements, I was able to calibrate the model without the inclusion of what we would consider to be a porous barrier. The model, when we took the traffic or that was counted out in the field, as well as the speed data that was collected during the measurement period, I'd have to go back and look, but I believe that we were within a decibel, which is, which the rule of thumb for NCDOT policy is within 3. So we were within about 1, I believe 1.5 max, which is considered a pretty calibrated model.
Gotcha. So the difference we see then between Exhibit 3.1 and 3.2 is the fence. Technically, there's not a fence in the first model, but really what we're seeing is a difference in a different material type between the two fences.
Or a more robust material that's not actually letting the noise spill through the overlapping slats.
And then peak hour, remind us all when the peak hour is for traffic on this road.
So it's not a specific time because that varies a little bit here and there throughout the day, but it's based on what is called the ADT, so the annual daily traffic, as well as various factors that get applied. So there is a directional factor and what's called a K factor, which then allows you to take that ADT and reduce it down into what would be designated a peak hour.
You'd probably have to do like an actual traffic count to be able to know. I mean, obviously events are certain times of day, so time of day is potentially important, but okay, that answers my question. I want to hear about the material, and I'll have some more questions, but thank you for answering
We've got
this.
another question over here.
Hey, Ted, real quick, my question is regarding porous physical barriers, in a sense. My assumption, because I don't have any basis for this, is that sound typically finds a way through if there's a hole anywhere in anything, and I just know that from a construction standpoint. Smallest holes sometimes can allow a lot of that sound through, but you also mentioned deflection in what you did. So can you help me, and you probably already answered this, but help me understand what's that difference? Why would the sound not go over? Or it appears that between the wall, the material and the brick columns, there may be a voided area. Why would that sound not find a way through? What's deflection versus how does sound find a way through it?
So I'm going to have to answer that in a couple pieces, and if I stray one way, feel free to correct. So I guess first, from a deflection standpoint, are you referring to deflection back over the highway or in a different manner?
So my initial question that's in my head is, so the fence that's there today, 6 foot, even though it's porous, it provides some deflection.
It's a very minute amount because, as you had mentioned, like noise travels through openings when they're there.
Okay.
So a lot of the comparisons that can be made to noise is a little bit easier to understand in terms of maybe light. So if you had a flashlight on the opposite side of that fence, given how the slats are currently laid out, you will see the light very easily. So same thing with the sound. It's coming through, hence we didn't include it in the existing conditions model because it didn't do anything from a reduction standpoint. So when we talk about providing a more robust barrier, a more solid barrier, that's then likely going to be blocking the noise and not letting it through. Sure, to an extent, there are gaps that noise could so-called creep through, but yeah, over, under, around, a lot of the times the barriers themselves can be designed and constructed in a manner to keep that happening at least to a very minimal standard or a minimal amount. And that would be something that Bob and I would be able to work together on. But then we talk, or I think you had mentioned also about noise going up and over the wall. That's going to happen no matter what. Truthfully, like you could put a 50-foot barrier out here, you will still hear noise from the roadway, maybe to a much lesser extent, but it's going to go over no matter what. But the point of asking for this variance to go up to 8 feet is to help, increase the available blockage line of sight, which then keeps the noise also down to a minimum.
But it's fair for us to assume that the fence there today is providing at least some deflection. You're just arguing in your case, it's minor.
It's very minor.
Very minor.
Especially because it's a thin wood slat material that is offset and not completely blocking the noise to come through. So yeah, I mean, if you go back, you can see in that kind of top image, there are pieces that, I mean, even in the bottom right of that image, the bottom right image, you can see the light on the other side of the fence today. And so the ability of this fence to actually reduce noise a noticeable amount is pretty hard to come by.
And I'm sorry, just let me clarify. I'm so sorry, I'll make it quick. And it's, so your data, if a wooden fence was built to replace this one that is less porous, that's more consistent, that's what the data is that we have, that it's 6 foot?
No, the more robust material that we've modeled is not what we would call a solid kind of no gap wood fence. It's got a higher, what's called an STC rating, so a sound transmission class rating.
Okay.
That's probably closer to be in line with what Bob was mentioning about other materials that we've looked at. So composite, fiberglass, PVC, I mean, concrete masonry, like those are other more robust materials that can provide more of a reduction. And if for some reason another wood fence was put in there, we would have recommended that additional treatments be applied to that fence to help reduce the noise further.
But a 6 foot fence built out of the materials that you're speaking of would then as well decrease noise and deflection as well. Okay, thank you.
That was one of the things that, as we were looking through materials after we had this discussion, we were talking about wood fences, and that's what's led us to different designs and different materials, because in talking with Tad, the wood fence, even the wood fence that we had proposed, it would help a little bit because it doesn't have as many holes, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't do much more unless we sandwiched, we had wood and a liner, a sound deadening acoustical mat in between, and then another piece of wood on the other side. So it's led us down the path of looking at alternate materials rather than just what we had proposed.
You have to walk me through it, but thank you.
Yeah.
You're doing a good job. That's right.
We had one more question?
I've seen the fence, there's a layer on this side and there's a layer on that side. And a lot of it, the inside layer has not been repaired. Where you see a lot of the light, there are slats missing. Is that not correct? Because I've seen slats missing on the inside, not the road side, but the other side.
I'm not exactly.
Slats this way and that way, right? There's
Yeah,
slats on the
they're-
outside and on the inside.
Yes, ma'am, and then they're off.
Really a hole, because the slat on the back side covers the hole, correct?
Straight on, yes,
Right,
but as soon
okay.
as you get an ever so slight angle off of that, you can immediately see through.
Can from right there. As you can from right there.
Well, yeah, because there's some slats missing on that side.
You can actually ride by and see events when there's light out there. If you're riding down Highway 5, you can see the lights. It's like a screened view as you're driving through.
Good. Any other questions for the sound?
Thank you, very helpful.
Okay, thank you. It was very helpful. Go ahead, sir.
Did you
Well,
have a
I
question?
wanted to tee you up, so that's.
We're moving on.
Great. Okay, so there was also, we added this slide because there was some discussion last time about the dimensions of the column, and then also the material. And you can see that the proposed fence that we had last time was 8 feet. The columns that we have are 4 feet wide. I think that was the question that came out of the last meeting, how wide were the columns? What you see is the width, the column that's in front of the resort, which we were patterning everything off of for this fence as well. That column is 4 feet 4 inches wide, and that's the actual construction drawing too from that fence. So we were patterning everything off of those columns and those materials as we were going. So we've looked at alternate materials. As Tad mentioned, I think we decided that the wood fence wasn't going to do what we thought it was going to do. So we've looked at a few different options of materials. This is a composite material that really looks like wood. It's a pretty nice material that we could include with some columns and other things. We've also discussed a full masonry wall, a brick wall that would go around. That would be an 8-foot high brick wall of very nice brick material. And we would have columns and whatever that design would ultimately be. Or some combination of those materials. So maybe part of it in the most sensitive areas would be full masonry, and then other areas might be composite. So working through that design, and I think we'd like to have some flexibility on that design as we're moving forward and pricing different materials and going through that. That's what we'd like to have from a material standpoint. I think any fence that we would, the detailing on the previous fence was what was leading us to a variance on the fence. So I think we'd like to kind of move away from that and be able to consider these alternate materials that will actually really help the noise issues.
So if I understood what you just said, and let me clarify, is go back to that one slide you were just on. You're no longer considering those X-shaped things at the top, so it would be similar to what you showed in materials then? Or to-
Yeah, something more.
Something more along
like
that line.
And there's a vertical or a horizontal look, whichever it might end up being. And you can see those fences, back to your point about holes. Those holes are basically eliminated. And we would be able, if we do a brick column there, we'll be able to match that material to that brick column so there's not a gap in between.
And yeah, I guess just to follow up with that, the material that we've discussed, the slats themselves have grooves in them so that they actually are seated. So they're not sitting just on top of each other. There's actually, it's like a tongue and groove system that would be in place to help then reduce the ability for noise to creep through.
So technically, and I'm not sure 100% by looking at the pictures in the PDO, but this is not, something like this, not talking about height, but just the type, is not a variation. Maybe staff can help. Are we changing the request to not include a variation under the material type? Because before it was the patterned area at the top.
That was leading us to.
This appears to be consistent with the PDO.
So which proposal would we, one of these two?
Maybe, and it could also be a brick wall, a full masonry wall as well, in a and/or a combination of those materials.
Well, and, yeah, I guess you don't have to say today, but if you're not asking us to consider a variation on material type, that's really what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, and I think that's the case. I
Fence
think
type.
we're going to have to go through the HPC, and they're going to control the design
Yep.
of what that wall looks like ultimately. And I think what we're asking for is the ability to work with the HDC in that fence design.
Yeah.
And then
You would
maybe as a
prefer,
condition- I'm sorry?
you would prefer us not to ask you.
Design-related
yeah.
questions?
Well, I think they're two different things.
Right.
Like we mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
we're trying to understand setback and height as we design, so.
Well, I think
rather-
the question before this board today really is, other than application of the ordinance strictly, is whether or not the traffic is the true hardship. And I don't see any reason we would need to get into fence materials at that point in time, if
And-
that's what our.
And to just be clear, the sole reason, and I was coming back in the room as Bob was highlighting the particular section of the proposal as we had known it, that one section along the top was the only thing that staff deemed to not be consistent with the PDO regulation. So
It's
if,
gone away then.
excuse me?
That's gone away.
It seemed sort of like still an open question. So for the record, it'd be good to have it
Actually,
stated.
I think that what we were proposing before, I'm not sure the materials that we're going to need to use to do this would allow for that kind of detail. So I think the materials that we need, the noise study really changed the thinking on what the materials would be and how it would look.
So you're no longer asking for a variance in that area?
No.
For our edification, however, can you tell me what is more effective as a sound barrier, masonry or this composite?
Depending on the thickness of the masonry wall, that's always going to be designated as a more robust material that would have a higher STC rating to reduce noise better. But generally, these types of walls, the composite walls versus the masonry, you might see a very small difference in favor of the masonry, but nothing that usually would be designated as an extremely noticeable difference.
I have one more question for Tad, since you're still here. When you did your field measurements, did you take measurements on the private side of the fence, so inside of the property?
Everything was
Yep,
within.
it was, okay.
So like I was saying, you can kind of, it's easier to see here. Or actually, I can't even point, so.
Okay, yeah, I think I misunderstood when you were describing before. I was thinking it was just outside of the fence, but.
Oh, yeah, no, Bob can point. So basically where we took a measurement right about there, there's a big tree just north, or I guess just above. So we took a measurement right there. No, you were correct.
Yeah, it's jumpy.
Oh. But basically,
Technology
we
issue.
were about, I think that we were about 10 feet away from the fence line on the resort's property. And then from that point on, we took another measurement, basically in line with the villas, I guess the first villa that's a little bit further back. And then the putting green area that you can see was where a third measurement was taken. And so we had 3 concurrent measurements taken at various distances on the property to understand the fall off of traffic noise.
Thank you.
Tad, was there any historical data of Highway 5 traffic considered in this, or was just the sampling that, the current sampling that you have?
No, when we made the existing conditions model, we pulled traffic data from the NCDOT online ADT database. So it's collected data from and for NCDOT's purposes, so it's something that anyone can go and get.
But for your illustrations today, those are based upon the impact of the noise level today's.
Today, yeah,
Today's,
they-
not,
I
so,
think I think technically the most recent database volumes were from 22. I'd have to go back and look, but that, I mean, the most current volumes were pulled, but historically, they've been very consistent out in this area for the past 5 or so years.
that was consideration of vehicle mix and speed you mentioned. And if speed was policed and moderated heavier, would that decrease noise decibel upon Highway 5? Would that have a
Lower
impact?
speed, or lower speeds usually equal lower noise levels. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to regulate all the time, and, you know, you're going to have your occasional vehicle drive by with their windows down and music up, so there are various instances that, you know, are really hard to abate, but on average, during a peak hour, with traffic traveling, I believe, I think that based on the data I collected, everything was right around the posted, which was great. No one speeding too much, but when we modeled it out, this is what the peak hour traffic generally produced in terms of noise.
I have a couple questions for Calvin whenever it gets to that point, but no, kind of along those lines, but just whenever you're ready for me to have those. You're next. Okay. Calvin, kind of along those lines, when we're considering as a board historical, you know, traffic increases on Highway 5s and how that equated to the increase, you know, in noise level, which you guys are, which is leading to us today asking for a variance, if you follow my thought process. One of the things for that is you're stating there's been an increase of complaints from guests. Can you give us some insight of what kind of complaints? Can you give us, I don't know if there's any data from your side or historical data from complaints?
So we, within the last year and a half, we switched our systems over. We tracked that, and we lost a lot of that historical data, to be honest. So we've lost some of that ability to retrieve it. But we do get a lot of pushback as we look to sell events on that lawn and all that. We have had, but I don't have anything that other than verbatims from our event planners.
I think we're okay with that verbatim. So what kind of complaints are we just hearing? Just general complaints, and has it been increasing over time that leads you asked for this variance?
I've heard more of it recently.
Okay.
I mean, that's the best I can give you, is I've heard more of it recently.
Okay, because I think when we think about applying the ordinance strictly, of course, to everybody involved, something is the hardship.
Right.
Of course, and that's what we're going to prove. And then I think the board's got to answer whether or not initially that that the decibel level coming from Highway 5 is a hardship, and then whether or not it's been an increasing hardship on you. So that's what I'm trying to do. Thank you.
So one of the comments I made in the fall was, in the fall,
It seems like it.
sorry, in our first meeting, on the topic of hardship, to jump off here, Jeremy, you know, the ordinance says if you want to build a fence higher than 6 feet, it needs to be outside of the setback. So how do you demonstrate that there is hardship in building an 8-foot fence outside of the setback? I feel like this has shown that you need a better fence where you are, and that 6 foot makes a big difference. But I don't see clearly how strict enforcement of a larger fence being outside of the setback, I don't see that hardship demonstrated here. You've kind of mentioned maybe more clearing, et cetera, but do you have anything else to speak to on that today?
So that might be again, a Tad question, because from our conversations, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the closer we get the wall to the noise source, the more effective it is at reducing that transmission. Is that accurate?
But you did say, I mean, maybe half the fence right now is outside of the setback, so we're only talking about, I mean, I don't know, what distance are we talking about? How far inside the setback are we on the lower section?
That's the existing fence line.
Right.
Doesn't show the,
Doesn't
'cause
show,
we have a slide, but it's probably not in this.
not in this, yeah, it's, yeah.
Is it on your storage device?
No.
We can back out. Okay. think that's where they did the study from, if there was one 5 feet.
Yeah.
Reanalyzed scenario of us moving the barrier within the setback was 5 foot off the property line. So it's completely within the setback now, at least, the scenario that we were looking at, other than the existing fence line.
Yeah.
Such fences and walls shall not be built in or through a required buffer unless the fence or the wall has been designed as an integral part of the buffer and approved as such. Sorry, let me read that again, just because it didn't go on the record. It's a subsection C of what it is and what we stated this was going to be on, this whole public hearing on. Fence and walls in non-residential zoning districts and/or non-residential properties, except in RD zoning, which this is not, fences and walls or similar structures not over 6 foot in height may project into any required setback. Such fences and walls shall not be built in or through a required buffer unless the fence or wall has been designed as an integral part of the buffer and improved as such. So if you think about that, if we're putting in sound baffling, is that not part of the buffer? That variance, in which case, that's where we're at. And then it goes on with some other discussions, but those are all about RD zoning. But that's what the hearing is about, is this subsection C.
But just the first part that you read, it is, the portion about it being part of a buffer or not, that is not applicable in this case.
Okay. So that's my question. Thank you. And why would that be, actually? I guess so I understand.
Largely because we're dealing with a existing built environment that predates the adoption of any of the zoning regulations. If you think in a new development where a new buffer would be required, that's where this portion of the code would apply. There is no required buffer here because the development predates any ordinance, zoning ordinance that would have been in play.
Okay. So where we put it is then not particularly relevant.
It still is because of the first portion of that sentence where it says the height and whether fencing of a certain specific height may or may not project.
Any required setback.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So that's what this whole hearing is about, so basically, from what I can see, what I read. Bruce?
When you were doing your sound modeling, did you model with this new compositor masonry the variation between a 6 foot height versus the 8 foot? What is the true decibel difference between that?
We need a microphone for that. Yeah. Sorry. And if it's easier for you, Tad, you can stand there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see what the real number variation is there It's hard to tell with the colors.
I have a question.
Another question.
A question kind of along that same topic, just for our knowledge. In your table one, the short-term noise measurement data, some of the decibel levels that you measure, 55 feet, 155 feet, and 240 feet away from Beulah Hill Road. 55 foot, 76.2, was that the highest level that it was measured, or was that an average of any certain amount of time? Were there any measurements that you took that, given your chart here, that would meet at the point on your chart where you state that a noise level becomes annoying, which is 80 decibels?
Detailed data, but I believe that based on what was in there, the maximum noise levels were in the upper 70s, mid to upper 70s at the loudest condition, which would have equated to either a motorcycle driving by or someone with their windows down, blaring their music. But those are very short peaks. And so the equivalent noise levels, the 59 up to, or down to, I think the lower 50s is what we then used and compare against with these decibel level contours.
And within a minute, is that what, no minute, or are they consistent for a minute, or is that a second, a couple seconds?
I mean, it varies. And so when we take the measurements, we obtain them in 1 minute intervals. And so those fluctuate up and down throughout the measurement period. So we took a 30-minute measurement and then counted traffic concurrently for 20 minutes, which is once again in line with what NCDOT does. And so these fluctuations are then summarized into what we call an hourly equivalent. And so that's what we then represent and compare against, knowing that, like I was saying, there are going to be events that happen no matter what that are going to increase noise levels for a very short period of time and bring them back down.
I know a lot of this seems like we're getting to the weeds with the questions, but it helps our mindset when we're trying to consider the hardship, so thank you.
You have something else, sir?
I'm thinking about how to address Matt's question.
Yeah.
We have that slide, it's just, we don't have it here.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I guess,
I mean, I don't want to get into design, but this is a compelling study in a graphic, and the area of greatest impact that appears on between A33 and 32, you know, is the area where you also have an existing brick wall. I don't know what the height of that brick wall is, the blue line. Okay, so you got, it almost makes sense to move a 6-foot fence closer to the road as close as you can, because then that moves it closer to the source. I mean, unless somebody else sees it, I can get there on 4 out of 5 of our points, but unnecessary hardship, I don't see it.
looking at the height, or looking at the height and looking at, let's see, Tad help me. I'm trying to find the height of the existing areas that are already within the buffer and the setback. And, you know, those are, you know, the higher we go, the better it gets in all the scenarios in those buffer areas. So, you know, in pushing it closer to the road in all the scenarios, the best scenario is that scenario from a noise perspective, and that's the 8-foot height barrier out closer to the road.
Right. I mean, we're talking about the yellow, which is a 50 to 55, compared to the green, which is a 45 to 50, knowing that there's a spectrum of values in there that kind of falls all over. So,
Right.
is it enough to grant a variance for 2 feet in fence height inside the setback? I mean, that's where I feel like you've shown actually how you can improve it, meeting the current standards without a variance. I mean, that's compelling to me. What's the difference between the 6 and the 8? You know, I mean, that could be enough that it could be data, you know, it could be time of day, it could be other factors. So I don't see hardship in requiring a 6-foot over an 8-foot fence. So that's where I am.
Whenever you allow us to get into board deliberations, I'd like to learn more about it.
And that, thank you, Jeremy, for that, because I do want to make sure that we don't lose sight that we do need to offer the floor up for others who have testimony that they want to, or any other presentations for the board before deliberation.
Anything else you have?
Nope, good to go. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. Somebody want to run back and grab the list?
You want me to get it?
We'll get the list and see if there's any names on it.
Thank you.
There are names on the list, so apparently, is there anybody else who's currently in the audience that wants to testify? I don't see anybody standing up and running towards the microphone, so I'm going to assume that that's no. Thank you. Okay, so then I think we're into the deliberation, and I'll leave the public hearing open in case there's questions to ask of somebody who's already testified, but it is up to the board.
Or do you want to go around, or however you want?
Who wants first?
Okay, I mean, for me, always focusing on the hardship. And is this a hardship? And does this solve the hardship? And I think that's something that we have to answer. You know, so that's why I was interested in a little bit more input from Matt, that we have to answer first, is the sound level today a hardship on them? So for me, and I think that's where I'm at, and then once we have established whether or not that today is a hardship, does this solve it? And that's where we can get into the weeds heavily. So I was interested a little bit more about what Matt thought from his thought process.
Now, I'm not a sound or traffic engineer, but I feel like the difference between the 6-foot and the 8-foot as modeled, that's really, based on what we have to look at, that's kind of the question of where the hardship is, and it's, you know, for the average person, is 53 decibels more of a hardship than 47? I don't have enough information to say yes.
Well, this
The,
is,
I'm sorry, the other piece of that would be, is there a demonstrated hardship by, you know, building an 8-foot fence at 20 foot inside the property line? And we also don't have that information. So in the absence of both of those, I feel like unnecessary hardship would not result from enforcement of strict application of the ordinance. But, you know, I'm open to others. Somebody's looking at it differently.
Struggling to keep the focus on the hardship issue, knowing that there's probably unspecified potential positives with, you know, granting the variance depending on, you know, what we might ultimately see. But I know that's kind of outside the bounds here. But I keep pondering those issues.
So what do you think you're missing, I guess is my question. What do you think you're missing?
It would almost appeal to me if the Historical Review Committee, you know, was looking at this simultaneously.
That's not going to happen.
I know that's not going to happen, but I mean, I think that's where I keep wondering in terms of appearance and village improvement and enhancement, and I think it could be realized, but that's not the matter before us.
Well, it's my understanding, Alex, is that this is to get the variance through, and we're looking basically at the 8-foot plus height. But they still have to go through the HPC for design, and they still have to get a building permit, or a permit to install it, so again, would be a review on your part as well. So there is 2 more parts to the review.
That's why I would suggest that as a board that in our findings that we, I would suggest that we do not enter into much, any conditions or much into that design of this fence as we can. So just a suggestion.
Alex, am I not correct in
The-
what I said?
So a fence is a staff-approved development permit every week, every day, as long as it meets the standards, right? So we wouldn't be able to issue anything of a request like this, absence of variance. Because the property is located within a historic district, then there is one other development review that,
The next step to this, if I understand, would be then basically go to HPC, correct?
depending on what the request would be. Yes, but there would be other developmental regulations that would apply no matter what. And those are the historic district standards. And because that is not part of the request, then, the board should not consider that in their deliberations. I think which it seems like the board is struggling with is you have your prescribed standards of review that are given to you. And hardship's the key word and almost all of them but one. So it sounds like what you have to wrestle with, and where it's the reason why you have this process and why you're charged with carrying out this duty is based on the evidence and the testimony that has been given to you. Have you felt moved or compelled to grant a variance based on those standards of review? Is there something peculiar to this property because of X, Y, or Z that may not be the same in another property? Is there something that is more impactful here based on situations or circumstances that have been clearly presented to you that wouldn't apply elsewhere?
Those questions.
Correct.
And provide specific words to those four items in part of our decision. There's no way around that.
That's your box.
Other side. Do you have something? Questions, comments?
I would like to know when that traffic study was done, because I'm a little confused. There's a lot of traffic in the last year and a half because of the USDA with all their trucks, et cetera. So that needs to be considered as well, because that's not going to be a problem.
Okay, well,
He was here on January 11th, and it was the morning when he took the measurements.
that's the traffic. And let me make sure I'm clear on this too. What we're dealing with is a model, okay? And we take in those variables, if you will, that you outline for us. So we're not taking into specific number of cars going by, or we're not taking into, anything. So a lot of this is an average over a period of time. In the
No.
form of a model.
Yes, and so in the model, when we went through and pulled the ADT data from NCDOT's traffic, like online traffic website, we broke that down into a peak hour. So an hour throughout the day that will have X number of vehicles hypothetically traveling through based on the characteristics of the road and other data that's been collected historically. And so then we use that to assign a number of automobiles. There are truck percentages that have been collected over the years, so an average, number of medium trucks, heavy trucks, and then the other characteristics or other vehicle classes that can be put into the model are buses and motorcycles, but usually we don't have that granular data. NCDOT does not collect that, at least regularly. So we only had vehicles like automobiles, your typical run-of-the-mill cars, vans, trucks, medium trucks, which are going to be box trucks, mail trucks, stuff like that, and then heavy trucks would be dump trucks, 18-wheelers, just the bigger ones. And so the data that was pulled from NCDOT's traffic website was then used to put individual volumes along those roadway segments to then allow us to compare to what would be existing peak. And correct, you know, it's going to fluctuate throughout the seasons of the year, throughout the days of the month, just because traffic is not exactly the same every single day. So this is a snapshot. It could be worse some days, it could be less some days. So this is an average peak that we analyzed and then went through the modeling scenarios to understand like how the various modeled walls, height and location would then affect by reducing the noise levels within the areas of concern on the resort.
Oh, mathematical modeling then is basically something that you collect data from outside sources, implement that, and then take your sound ratings and put that into the model, and it comes out with a calculation of over a standard peak time, or a time that, as determined by the DOT.
No, there are algorithms built within the model. And so when we take the existing noise level data that we did at those varying distances, concurrent traffic volumes were counted. So we had a camera set up to count traffic that passed the point of measurement during a 20-minute period, and then that was then used to allow us to calibrate the model to those existing conditions. So basically, at this point within the model where we took a measurement, it read, I think 59.2 was the closest one. During that time that we were measuring those noise levels, we had this many cars pass by, this many trucks pass by, any type of vehicle class that we can put in the model, we counted, and then also used a radar gun to then determine how fast they were going. So then an average travel speed was put into the model, and those built-in algorithms were then used to take both the data that was collected from a vehicle classification standpoint and travel speed standpoint, and then match it up as best we could with the measured noise levels. And you gotta remember, the measured noise levels have birds chirping in the background, people walking from the villas to the Carolina Inn. I mean, there are other things that the model can't account for, which is why we try to calibrate it as best we can. And like I had mentioned, Matt, the difference was within a decibel-ish, which is really, I mean, it's really good in the grand scheme of things.
Models are as close as we're gonna get to reality.
For now, yes. Because no one's gonna build a wall just to test it and then take it back down.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
Can I ask this for a little bit? So something that's coming to my mind is the peculiarity of this property really is the use, being a hotel use, being an event space, versus the residential neighboring properties. Any input on that from the board? I mean, I think that's something to at least consider is the use of inside this property. Some thought peculiarity there?
It is a different use than
Different
the
use.
house or.
Well, from a zoning standpoint, of course, yeah.
It's a hotel use.
Hotel use.
So I mean, the typical things you would see in a hotel in a big yard like that, or weddings, bar mitzvahs, I don't know, whatever else you might put a tent up there and do during that period of time. So yes, they are not the same thing you would consider if it were a house.
Not in consideration of our hardship, but it is safe to assume that if we're going to keep noise out, it would also keep some noise in. We're safe to assume that? We're not going to get in a conversation.
Bet-
We're not going to ask.
Better than the chain link they're throwing up now.
Okay.
I'm working on a motion.
Work on a motion?
I'm working on one too, but go ahead. I'm going to go with you. I mean, I can do it, but I'm not quite there yet. I've got a couple things I want to talk about with the board if you want me to have a motion.
Well, you might be further along than I am if you're writing.
What's the topic?
I can't get there on hardship. So,
I can make a motion to approve, and then if you guys want to talk the rest of the way.
For me, it's approval of,
It's all one motion.
it would be all one motion, but it would be some of the reasons why is what I'm,
Your findings, which are
facts and
important.
findings.
Yes,
of
for
why it would be
each
important.
They
standard.
have to
So as long as you don't
support-
mind me adding to yours, if you
You got to build those to support the yes or no on the top.
Okay, I could be ready.
Right? Any other questions, comments? Your motion, please.
I move the Board of Adjustment deny the variance request for 80 Carolina Vista and adopt the following findings of fact. Unnecessary hardship would not result from strict application of the ordinance because that hardship has not been demonstrated. The hardship does not result from conditions that are peculiar to the property. The hardship does result from conditions that are peculiar to the property based on the use for the property. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the property owner. Traffic is on the road is not the result of anything the resort has done. And the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. While I think it doesn't meet the hardship, I do think the intention behind it is consistent. But we got to have 4 out of 4. So. Sure.
Motion's been made, second?
Second.
Second, okay. Discussion on the motion.
When we state that the hardship has not been demonstrated, is it because they have not explained far enough of how the increase has impacted visitors?
No, the variation is requested on the height in the setback to be allowed to have a fence over 6 foot inside the setback.
Hardship that they wrote, and I'm considering it. It's with the location of the Carolina Hotel, Hotel Villas, and Hotel Pool directly adjacent to Highway 5. Vehicular noise is a growing concern. And we can go farther, but it just talks about increased traffic and volume. They didn't have any impact on. Okay, so my consideration of hardship is more along the lines of, has there been impact from traffic noise that would, so it's a little different than your thought, but okay.
Right,
I don't
well,
have
that's
any
what I'm just
changes to
going
your
with this. So if we say hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance doesn't say you can't have a fence, it just says it has to be maximum this tall.
Yeah.
We're not saying they can't have a fence
Sure.
at all to protect the noise. We're saying if it's above 6 feet, it's just got to be 20 foot from the property line. And if they can put it on the property line and it could be 6 feet tall.
We had first come to the conclusion that the noise from Highway 5 is a hardship in general upon that without strict order, so. Okay. No more discussion.
Oh, no, I've already seconded.
Okay, well, I've seconded, but do you have any discussion on the motion? Okay. Then I guess we're up for a vote. Would you please read the motion again?
I move that the Board of Adjustment deny the variance request for 80 Carolina Vista and adopt the following findings of fact. Unnecessary hardship would not result from the strict application of the ordinance because it's not been demonstrated that unnecessary hardship would result from constructing a fence at the current limit of 6 feet rather than 8 feet. The hardship does result from conditions that are peculiar to the property because of the specific use of the property. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. Right, because this is where I have a little difficulty with this language, because we're saying that there's no hardship, but then these others have the word hardship in it. But overall, if we're talking about the traffic, the hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. And the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. It would be if hardship was documented.
Have something else?
Is it possible for me to speak and make a request at this point related?
Listen to it.
Okay.
I can't guarantee what the
No,
outcome will be.
understood. But we want to ask one question in relation to the 6-foot height and inside that buffer. And in particular, Alex, could you back up a slide? So if you see that area is the existing fence, that green line is the existing fence. Obviously, the area that we saw where the gate is, that roughly where that yellow dot is, from there to Ritter Road is a 6-foot high fence currently inside the buffer. And if we get beyond that and go back toward the pool, understanding that outside of that 6 feet, or outside of that 20 feet, we can go to 8 feet, and it's not an issue. One of the things, in order to remain consistent with the design along that area, having a 6-foot high fence in front of the villas based on a consistent design element, because the design that we've shown has the columns, and having that consistency, and those columns go up above the fence, right? Is it possible to have something that allows the columns to go over that 6-foot height in that area from the gate to Ritter Road for design consistency as we're going down that area?
I think that could be considered by the board, but we'd have to back out of this current motion.
Right.
Sorry about it.
Yeah.
We would have to discuss it as a board, to your point, if you're trying to
Yeah.
mitigate it.
I just wanted to offer that before.
Yep, yeah.
I'm going to, as we're still in the motion, I'm going to go back to Alex's point earlier. If a fence request came in, and I mean, I know what the PDO looks like, but if the height of the fence and was it 6 foot and then the columns were above, does that fall in the purview of staff to approve, or would that have to come?
The sections are for fence, walls, and columns, so the height would apply to columns as well.
Concern would be, would that solve the hardship?
Yeah, we're kind of, there's a motion, there's a second, there's been discussed. And, as much as you can appreciate another offering here, I don't know that the board has had ample time to, or, you would have to decide, is that, what level of the standards of review would or would you not have, or be moved? Would the needle move based on, it's an offering at this point, it's nothing concrete to have and look at and review at this point, so.
I did think about your point, Bob, before making the motion, and that's when I checked to make sure that the height did include that, and honestly, I couldn't get there on our own to grant the variance just for the columns and the wall.
We have a motion on the floor, and it's been seconded, and it's been read twice, so we'll vote. I'm going to take a personal vote as we go around, and Bruce, we'll start with you.
The microphone, please, just so we have it.
I'm going to turn on the microphone.
No.
No.
Let's make sure we're clear.
Yeah, state
Is-
your name and then vote.
But do you support the motion and that's on the floor?
Bruce
Yes,
Hieronymus, I
or-
do not support the motion.
No, I do not support the motion.
State your name, please, first.
Jeremy Hooper.
Okay. Tom Schroeder, I do support the motion.
Matt Jones, yes.
Sonia Rothstein, yes.
Sorry, gentlemen. All right. This matter's done, so we can go back to. A motion to close the public hearing.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Okay. Any other business now that we're back in the regular meeting? The next meeting date is the 4th of April, 4/4/2024. Motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn the regular meeting at 6 o'clock.
Second.
And it's been seconded by Sonia. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting's adjourned at 6 PM.